Okay, so let's poke the bear a little bit on the classic build versus buy debate. I'm going to tackle this from a different angle. How does the question differ, or the answer or the consideration differs when you have a power platform team that is a well-oiled machine and it's rocking and rolling? So let's talk about the classic issue that we really run into. So you have these ERP systems that you have. So you may have one for HR. And then you may have another for the CRM. And then you have a general ERP. And this ERP is going to handle everything that's operations. So if you're in services, it'd probably be how you handle your services, core services, maybe your clientele. If it's a product or manufacturing, it's your whole operation and product development pipeline. And then you have something centered around finance. How do you handle all your accounting, accounts receivable, payable, routing for approval, so on and so forth. Now, we all know that to bring one of these in house, even if you were bootstrapped and you built this using like spreadsheets or Access database or any one of those other homegrown type solutions, over time you grow into an ERP. So you kind of get like a package platform to handle all of this. There's usually a sponsor or a team of sponsors that will go through and evaluate all the areas of the business to bring one of these on board. And really, there's one person or usually one or two people who put their neck on the line that says, okay, we evaluated all the vendors in this space. We decided to go with this vendor. Is the budget's usually pretty hefty, in the millions of tens of millions, some depending on the size of the organization, hundreds of millions to implement this. And this is usually an implementation that usually takes several months to years to get through. Now, once you do that type of time investment as well as money investment, you want these to stick around for a long period of time, right? You want to be able to justify that you got your benefit and value from that investment. So you got a return on that investment. And over time, this is what we see that happens. So if I erase all of this, usually over time, this is what we see. So if you have that access, this is your business. And then something happens, at this spot here to where it starts to grow exponentially. This is that package that you spent all that time, money, and effort on in this capability. So over time, we tend to see this a lot where the the need for the business, the requirements of the business outpace the capabilities of the package solution. And if you go on-prem, this is probably even flatter. If you do one of these solutions that are in the cloud where the vendor is constantly updating, ideally you will have update patterns similar to Microsoft 365, where they're even doing updates and deployments as you work, or updates and deployments as you're asleep, and you just wake up the next morning and you have new features and capabilities. So some vendors are just not that sophisticated. It's usually hard to find one of those vendors that can really keep up to the pace of demand and ideally outpace the need of the business, where you have more technology than the business knows what to do with. Microsoft 365 is really, really good at this. That's actually the best scenario that you will want to be in. But ideally, your platforms are going to be in one of these two, where they're flat and your business growth is just outpace the capabilities. So the biggest question is, what do you do with this gap? Especially if you look at this other line, the years of ownership that you've had this platform solution. So say, for example, this is year 3, this is year 5, and this is year 10. Again, if this was a multi-million-dollar implementation, I ideally would love to see 10-year plus in order to recoup and justify that investment. This is where believe I'm a true believer that the Power Platform really comes into play. So if you look at this, what the Power Platform provides you, one, and I'm really referring to clients who are on Microsoft 365, you have Power Apps, Power Automate, Copilot to some extent. Power Pages. Power BI. And then this line here is your connector framework. The connector framework is actually the magic between all of this, because with the connector framework, now you can connect not only to Microsoft technology stack with these workloads, but also third-party vendor technology stacks within these workloads. So we see integrations with ServiceNow, so you have ServiceNow. You also have integrations with Salesforce. Workday. SAP Concur. In-house built .NET applications, so on and so forth. So with this connector framework, really your capabilities are endless. And I'm not saying that these are cloud hosted solutions that you can interact with. These can also be on-prem solutions that you can interact with, because with this connector framework, Microsoft also provides the on-prem gateway, which allows your cloud tools and capabilities to interact with services, data, and databases that actually are hosted on-prem within your data center. Now, again, these solutions are not meant to replace your ERP solutions or your platform best-of-breed solutions. They're really meant to bridge the gap. So what does that look like? So again, if I draw these out, so all your different platform solutions for marketing and for finance and for HR and so on and so forth, you're going to have these different use cases to where sometimes, not to pick on any one of these, but sometimes it could be very kludgy and clumpy, really clunky to interact with. I don't know about kludgy, but your business users, to get a unit of work done, sometimes have to click through 5, 6, 7, 20 steps just to get a unit of work done. And we see this all over the place. I mean, all of these platforms have their nuances and shortfalls. And what we tend to see with the Power Platform is that you create that Power App that makes it super easy to enter in information, really straightforward. Then there's a submit button. And then once they click submit, they would trigger a Power Automate. The Power Automate would then interact with one of its connectors that's a connector to one of these ERP systems, send that data to the ERP, allow the ERP or that platform to process that data, and then this will send some type of trigger or hook, and then that will then trigger the Power Automate. This will then update a SharePoint list or whatever data repository, and they're good to go. We love this scenario and this type of integration use case because you have users who are inside of these platforms every day, all day. So imagine like your sales team, they may be in Salesforce every day and all day. But then you may have like maybe a help desk or a client relationship agent that does not interact with Salesforce in that way, but they are servicing the client and they need something that's really related to their job function, because this is a transaction that they do 5, 6 times a day, and we can streamline that. But as they enter in the information and it goes through this process, the rep who's in Salesforce all the time can then see those updates real time. Right. So I'll say real time, there's a latency in some scenarios where this latency may be 5 seconds up to 3 minutes. But we're not talking an overnight to where something happens here and it takes 24 hours to see it here. So we design these solutions, as the business requires, to minimize this latency as much as possible. So again, looking at the build versus buy, and understanding that you're on the timeline to maximize the investment that you made in these very large package vendor platforms, that sometimes that the Power Platform really plays an instrumental piece into bridging that gap and allowing your company to continue to be productive, streamline operations, as well as use buying more time on that ERP before you look at the next package solution that you want to migrate into. Okay. So just because you have the Power Platform doesn't mean that you're sitting on the silver bullet. There are frameworks that you got to have in place for the Power Platform to be instrumental and be able to be a plus to your operation and not a negative to your operation. Now, if you don't go out here, if you don't approach this with a strategy, it can absolutely be a negative to your operation. What does that look like if you just willy-nilly create these solutions in the Power Platform without a very clear strategy? One, you start to create tech debt because now everyone in there have access to the Power Platform. They start to create all these solutions. And here we have IT have no idea of all these solutions that's being created. The users, you have business users out here using these solutions, and then all of a sudden something goes bump in the night. And because this user is used to calling the help desk, they're going to be asking the help desk that says, hey, this application that I'm using is no longer responding. I need help. The help desk agent has no idea that this thing even exists, let alone that this whole team of people has been using it for 3 to 4 months. Ask me how I know. So this is a very common use case that we find. And the overcorrection of this is that they say, you know what? No more Power Platform. We need to kill this. Let's stop the water. Let's stop the floodgates. There's no more creation. Go back to standing in line, waiting for IT to have availability, which is little to no time. And you just sit there and wait. And obviously, we've seen this story happen time and time again. This person that's waiting gets impatient. They escalate. Then that applies pressure here, usually to the technical manager or the CEO or whoever's in charge of that. These people jump the line. They get what they want. We build. And guess what? That's only good for 30 days. And the next 30 to 45 days, it happens all over again. And this becomes a political nightmare because usually it's escalate, get the leader to do something here. They pressure down. This person puts something on pause, right? Because they are busy, put something on pause, build this out, and then it just keeps happening time and time again. Now, to avoid this, I'm not saying that this fixes everything, but with a strategy, you can minimize this from happening. You can't prevent it. I don't think you can prevent anything from happening totally, but you can definitely minimize it. So the way that this works is that with a Power Platform, best center of excellence or best patterns and practices in place, what tends to happen is that applications that get created. Now, I'm going to draw this person here as the app maker. Don't assume this is a citizen developer. Just assume that this is someone building these applications. And what I'm finding more and more common across clients and organizations is that this person is actually a pro developer or someone with development background. Now, they tend to lean towards the Power Platform because spinning up a Power App with a Power Automate, storing the data in SharePoint, and using that Power Automate, creating some type of integration with SAP, ServiceNow, Workday, ... They can get this done in a fraction of a time than what it would take as a pro development tool. Now, I'm not just comparing the development code versus Power Platform coding. I'm also comparing the logging that you get out of the box with Power Platform, the infrastructure that you get out of the box with the Power Platform. So all of it, and then, the monitoring, the audits, the logs, and all this other good stuff. Like all of those pieces, once you can consider everything in, when you start to compare Power Platform versus the pro development, it's a fraction of a time because they have the unfair advantage of spinning up a Power App, Power Automate, and getting all this infrastructure in place day one. And it's one of those infrastructure pieces that scale with you. So it's not like, oh, you're going to spin this up and it only supports 50 users. No, you're going to spin this up. And today, as you have 50 users, and then 3 weeks from now, you're at 500, you don't skip a beat, right? There's architecture, there's patterns and practice, there's center of excellence pieces that have to go in play. Now, this is what that looks like. It was really fall into 4 main buckets. 1, classification. You need to classify. There needs to be a process in place that when someone spins up one of these applications, it gets classified to determine if it's a low-risk application, medium-risk application, or a high-risk application. So low, medium, and high. And you define what triggers these thresholds between these 3, right? Ideally, low means that it's not business critical. If it goes down, you can live without it for a week or so, and there's no bump in your operation. It's an inconvenience, but it doesn't halt you from getting things done. Medium, yes, you feel some frustration. You can't wait a week for it to be up and running and repaired. But, 1 to 2 days, 3 days, anything outside of the same day is ideal. That's what would be medium. As you can guess, and high, you need this thing done that day because it's impacting the business, usually impacting how the business makes money or impacting servicing your customers for the business, right? And anything that's a high, remember that one graph diagram I showed you where you have that help desk person getting called because they get called for everything because our employees or associates are trained to do that. If you can't breathe, call the help desk. If your computer's going out, call the help desk. If the batteries in your mouse go out, call the help desk, right? They're trained to do that. So as soon as they're using the application, because they don't know, to their point, they don't know the difference between I'm using this application that helps me put stuff in Salesforce versus I'm using Salesforce versus I can't access my email versus my username and password no longer works, or my MFA has expired, or I have a new device and I need to re-register MFA. They don't know the distinction of, nor should they, what I'm using and who to call who, when to call who based on what I'm using. And we purposely centralize that into one help desk, one email, one phone number, one whatever to help you with whatever. So to their defense, just because they're using a Power App that was created by a team outside of IT, they're not going to know the difference of when to call someone else. So they call this help desk person, and because you go through this classification, ideally this person has purview into all apps that are created. Most importantly, they have a purview into all classified apps that are created, and there's a contact and there's support and how, who to call to resolve it. They're not going to be in a position to resolve it. Their whole purpose is to get the right person in contact to resolve it. And that's what happens here. So, and that could be a catalog. You can register them in ServiceNow. You have many different ways on how to accomplish this. The key thing is classify these apps, get the right support model for those high critical apps, and then kind of go from there. Ideally, every app has a contact for the repair of the app. Now, here's another thing that I'm assuming as I'm mentioning this. The huge assumption is you establish that whoever build these apps are responsible for maintaining these apps, and that's critical. You do not want a scenario where you have this developer or app maker out here creating all types of applications, and they're under the false impression that if something goes wrong, they're not responsible for helping to support that. They should actually be the front line of defense to support these apps. And then ideally, granting access and granting control and all this other good stuff, that's what you want to make sure that's in place. The other thing you want to do with these app makers that are building these applications, you want to establish a center of excellence. What does that mean? What does that mean? Center of excellence is really a site, and ideally this would be a SharePoint site that we create. There's a SharePoint portal, and on this site they give them best practices. Here's some best practices for all of your Power Apps. Here's some best practices for all your Power Automates. Here are some best practices on security, and here's some best practices on integration pieces. And so as an app maker, they're responsible for consuming this content and practicing this content as they're building these applications. With the Center of Excellence, you also have some type of sharing, meaning that if one app maker finds something very useful, or they already created an integration with Salesforce, they're sharing that flow, or they're sharing that best practice, or they're sharing that service that item already exists. So that way, when the next app maker come along and they need to integrate with Salesforce using the Power Platform, they're not duplicating this piece. Now, this piece here, where you're sharing resources, you're sharing ideas, you're sharing techniques, really comes with another framework where you have best practices on reusability and shareability within the Power Platform. What does that mean exactly? Just like you have with custom code and pro development code, you want the ability for a user to see a Power App that is very close to what they're trying to create, have the ability to copy that app and then tweak it to make it their own. You want these app makers to have the ability to know, like, some type of catalog, very similar to where you expose like an API catalog internally within your organization. Because the one thing you try to prevent is 4 or 5 versions of the same type of API. It goes against the same data source. It has 3 or 4 or 5 duplicate actions on what it does against that data source, like CRUD operations or searches or queries, so on and so forth. So you want to build something similar to that, that when you get into the Power Automate and you have these child flows or different services type, microservice type flows within Power Automate, they are identified, cataloged to where other app makers can take advantage of that, minimizing the duplicate effort and then centralizing a common service that can be reused across the applications. Now, you can't get to this center of excellence within the day, but with the right team and someone that's knowledgeable, a team that's knowledgeable, usually pro services, that's seen many different flavors of this implemented across many clients and organizations, they can come in and really help you accelerate this process and these patterns and train up your app makers and build things as an example of what a well-architected, well-supported, easy to maintain Power application or Power solution look like within the organization. So again, build versus buy. When you have a Power Platform team, more importantly, when you have a Power Platform team that has these frameworks, that have these strategies, that have the governance, that has the best practices, that have the center of excellence, when you have that in play, it allows you to, one, move faster, minimize shadow IT, and again, buy you time to maximize your investments on your big best of breed Power Platform solutions.